Hello. Today we're going to talk about good and evil. So in Genesis, you get this um, repetition that God gives on each day that it was good. He separates light from darkness, and it was good. He makes animals come out of the dry land, and it was good. There's this affirmation of everything that he makes that it is good. Now, in the Christian tradition, there's a strong sense that all being, insofar as it exists, is good, even if that's something not attractive to us. So in these pictures that I have up, you've got a kitten and you've got a horse, and those tend to be attractive to people. We tend to think, oh, good. Then there's a mosquito, which I don't usually experience as good. And then there's a hagfish, and a hagfish is the ugliest thing that I know of. It lives in the sea. It can secrete buckets of slime. It's able, with its raspy mouth, to eat into the carcasses of dead things on the bottom of the sea. And it's good. That's the affirmation. Why is anything that exists good? Um, oh, well, I guess I didn't have a slide for that, but I'll just say that. Existence is good because it's a finite reflection of the infinite perfection of God. God, who is infinitely good, who is existence, who is being itself, as opposed to non being, as opposed to nothingness. Since anything that exists is a reflection of his being, is like a little color broken out of the prism that breaks down the white light of his being into all these little shades. Every being is a reflection of the infinite goodness of God. It's not God, but it's a created reflection of him. So, if all existence is good, what is evil? Because it's really clear that evil exists. If you don't believe that, we'll talk to David Benatar for a little bit. He'll tell you. He'll tell you about all of the evil that is in the world. So, how can we say that anything, insofar as it exists, is good? If that's true, what is evil, since evil also exists? Evil is the lack of a do good. Okay, this is worth memorizing, so I'll note that. Evil is the lack of a do good. Another way you could call it is it's a privation of good, a lack of something that ought to be there, non-being where there ought to be being, the lack of a do good. Notice do is not like do, it's due. In other words, something that ought to be there, that's due, that should be in this thing. Look at the picture of the plate. The plate is broken. It lacks. Now, if you wanted to see the clearest kind of lack, pull one of the pieces out in your mind. Take one of the pieces of the plate away. Okay, it's lacking something that makes it a good plate. It's lacking its perfection as a plate. It's also lacking, and even if all the pieces are there, because it is lacking the unity that it had before it cracked, the unity that makes it a plate. It is broken up. It lacks things that it needs to be what it is, to be what it was made to be. It's sort of like having a Where's Waldo search, right? You've done those, where you look through all the different pictures, like this picture on the screen, and you look for Waldo. Well, what if they did one and they left Waldo out? So you just search and search and search and search, and Waldo is not there. You're kind of trusting them that Waldo's going to be there. That's a travesty. It's a lack of a good, the lack of Waldo, even though you have searched for him. We're going to talk about two different kinds of evil. It's very important to make the distinction between the two. Natural evil is different from moral evil. At least it's not different in the sense that both are lacks, but it's different in what we're applying it to, because sometimes we talk about evil just in regard to moral evil, and we got to be careful not to do that when we're speaking philosophically about evil. Natural evil is just when any being, could be a statue, could be a rock, could be a fish, as in this picture, could be a human being, lacks something that ought to be there. So in this case, this fish does not have a head. Poor little fish, it lacks the head. Fishes are supposed to have heads. Now this head was probably cut off so the fish could be eaten. That's a good for us. It's not good for the fish because the poor fish is dead, lacking its head. Evil is the lack of this good, but it's not a moral evil. No one's done anything wrong here. The fish certainly hasn't done anything wrong, and the person cutting its head off, I would say, has not done anything wrong. The natural evil, though, is that it lacks something that it ought to have. A natural evil only exists when you lack something that ought to be there, that's part of your nature. So in this example, a human not having wings is not a natural evil. It's not the lack of a do good. Is it a lack of some good? Sure. Some good that could theoretically be there? Yes. But it's not lacking something that human beings have according to their nature. So it's not a natural evil. It's not lacking something according to nature. On the other hand, if one of my eyes were gouged out, then I would be lacking something. That would be a natural evil. Doesn't make me bad, but I'm missing an eye, which is something that it would be normal for me to have, something that would be according to my nature to have. If I was working on a uh, a painting, and in that painting it was supposed to be the painting of a house, and instead of painting the house, I painted the scenery and left the whole house out. Well, because the painting's supposed to be of that house, there's a lack. But if it were supposed to be a painting of the scenery, there's no evil in that. There's nothing lacking in a painting of the scenery that's supposed to be a painting of the scenery, even if it leaves out the house. Just because something is not there doesn't mean it's an evil. It's when something that ought to be there is not there. That's when it's an evil. And in this case, we're talking about natural evils, things that don't have any moral content whatsoever in and of themselves, but are just natural evils, lacks. That's what evil is, the lack of a do good. Now, what is moral evil? Moral evil is what you have when you've got an action that's not in accord with virtue. It lacks the proper order to what a human being ought to be. So in this case, you've got the murder of Julius Caesar, and what you have is a disrespect for the dignity of this person, Caesar. There is a lack there. All of the existing elements are good. There's nothing wrong with a sword. A sword in and of itself is good. A hand holding the sword, a hand in and of itself is good. That other little picture is supposed to represent free will. You see the little guy, he's driving the car of himself inside his head. Kind of a cool little drawing. Free will itself is good. All of those things are used in killing Caesar, but all of those are good. So what is the evil? Well, the evil is the lack of the proper respect for human dignity, the lack of the action's order to what is truly good. It's a failure in virtue, a lack of virtue. It's the willingness to choose something that does not accord with human flourishing, with what a human being ought to be. You see in that statue, you've got parts of the human being missing. Well, really, that's what vice does, not physically, but in what a person is. When someone does things that lack virtue, when someone lies, especially habitually, or when someone murders, especially habitually, or when somebody gets over the top angry all the time, or someone is gluttonous and just eats way too much all the time. These are things that take away from someone's full humanity. They make you start to lack what you ought to be. So the lack is choosing not to live according to what you are. What you are is someone made in the image of God. And when you don't live according to that, you're not living according to the likeness. Genesis says we're made in the image and likeness of God. What the image means is that we are made in a way that resembles him. We're made in a way that although he's infinitely more than we are, our particular refraction of him through having reason, through having free will, is something closer to him than the rest of visible creation that we know of. And so being in the image of God, that stays, but being in the likeness of God means living in accord with that dignity that we've been given, living in a way that is coherent with this great gift of being human that we have received, using our will for the true good, for the truth, for the defense of life and other persons, for taking responsibility for ourselves and for the needs of others. These sorts of things are things that are according to the image, and it's in living that way more and more that we become in the likeness of God, that was lost by original sin, by our first parents. What it means, I guess, just speaking philosophically, is that human beings, like any other natural thing, have a particular nature, and we're going to flourish if we're able to live in that particular way. A fish flourishes in water of a particular kind, and they flourish having the right kinds of food. We flourish by being honest, by being responsible, by being brave, and not doing the opposite of those. The opposite of those is moral evil. It's a lack of living according to, I could say, of what we ought to be. But what's even truer is to say, living according to what we are, to our nature, to the image of God that is within us. That's what moral evil is. And as you see in this picture, there's this guy, and he's lacking. He doesn't have part of his body. Well, that's really what moral evil is like, kind of symbolically. We become less than what we are by falling away from it. We restrict our being rather than letting it expand to its full extent. Okay, there we go. Evil, lack of a do good. Natural evil is just any being lacking anything that ought to be there. Moral evil is within the will of human beings, or angels for that matter, or any other rational beings. The lack of ordering our wills towards the true good in the right way. God bless you and have a wonderful rest of your day.